Thanks for tuning in to the World Journal Online. I'm Connor Orr, and today I'm bringing you a conversation with Josephine Boynton, a woman who has spent the last 7 months teaching English in France and was forced to leave early because of the rapid developments of COVID-19. Josie is from Illinois, but she has made her home in Colorado and came immediately down to Walsenburg and into quarantine as soon as she got stateside. In this podcast, Josie reads an essay that she wrote on the experience, and then she and I have a few words about the economy, both global and local, as well as about what to prioritize in this intense historical moment. Here she is.
Notes from Lockdown, France in the Pandemic. 7 months ago, I left Colorado to live and work in a small city called Cambrai in northern France as an English teaching assistant. I worked in a local middle school and high school where I helped English teachers improve the fluency of their students. While it was difficult to be far from my loved ones, my overall experience in France was very positive. I built strong relationships with people in the community, and after a few months, this quaint French town began to feel like my home. It was on March 12th of this year that life there began to take an alarming turn. I woke up that morning to 2 messages from my parents. One was from my mother telling me to come home by Friday or get ready to stay for the next 30 days at least. President Trump had just announced a travel ban for travelers from Europe. The other message was from my father explaining that there were exemptions for U.S. citizens and asking me what I planned to do. I felt an anxious shiver in my chest. I buried it with a deep breath. This was not news that applied to me. As my father had assured me, there were exceptions for non-citizens. I told my parents that I would be staying put and began my walk to work. The path to the high school where I worked took me clear across the city center. This large square sits in the shadow of a beautiful town hall. In the center of the square, there's a bustling parking lot, and along its edges were a number of cafes, restaurants, and shops. The center was already bustling at 9 a.m. The cars were filling the lot and circulating around the loop around it. People filled the scene, taking their morning coffees on the cafe patios, walking to work, or standing in small crowds outside of the bakery, enjoying the company with their morning croissants. I always enjoyed this morning scene. It was peaceful and energetic. The workday was like any other. I used the news of the travel ban as a warm-up for my students. Current events are a great way to get them talking. I explained to them that while it was a bit freaky, it didn't apply to me and there was nothing to worry about. Later, I chatted with the teachers in the lounge to make some plans for the next week. I made the 11th graders do a grammar activity with the promise that we would play a game in our next session together. Their begrudged acceptance felt like a victory. I had no idea I would get the opportunity to fulfill that promise. The sun and blue sky put an extra spring in my step on the way home that afternoon. The north of France had really lived up to its reputation of being cold and rainy over those long months of winter. There were finally some hints of spring in the air. I got to city center and drank in the beautiful weather. I picked up some bread and stopped in a cool shop that I had been meaning to check out for months. I had a nice conversation with the shopkeeper. Before I left, he told me to stop by next week. They were getting a new shipment in. Even simple conversations in French, like that one, felt like such an important part of my experience. They really made me feel like I was part of the community. At home, I worked on my lesson plans for the following week. I was going to teach a group of 6th graders how to play baseball on Monday. They had learned the ballpark song and everything. My Spanish roommate, Maria, was the first to let me know that President Macron would be addressing the nation at 8 p.m. We waited anxiously to see what he would have to say. That night, I sat on the couch with Maria and my other roommate, a fellow American named Nicole. President Macron started his speech by emphasizing the need to protect the most vulnerable of the population. He explained that we needed to buy time to ensure that there were enough medical resources to save lives. He encouraged everyone to continue taking all the measures already in place to slow the spread of the virus. Then the conversation shifted. Despite my best efforts, tears began to fall down my cheeks as President Macron announced, from Monday, until further notice, the preschools, elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, and universities will be closed. Beyond the bubble of disappointment in my throat from no longer being able to work, I was afraid. This was the first extreme measure taken by the French government to combat the virus, and it was the first real fear that I had felt in the face of it. My roommates and I comforted one another with empty assurances that this would all blow over soon and we would get back to work. But we really had no idea what the next week of our lives would bring. When I got to school the following morning, everything seemed strangely normal. The students were exchanging la bise, the traditional French greeting of touching cheeks, which is as natural as shaking hands or hugging is as a greeting here in the States. The teachers were stressed and attempting to make plans for their distance teaching sessions. The air was filled with happy chatter. I had 2 classes that morning. The second one was canceled to coordinate distance courses with the students. My first class passed too quickly. Though the next class was canceled, I sat in my room staring out the 3rd floor windows, fighting tears again as I wondered if I would ever be in this classroom again. I sought out my advisor at the school before I left. She knew no more than I did. She assured me that she would share things as they were shared with her. The ambiguity made my stomach turn. Saturday, neither my roommates nor I had any intention of leaving. In hindsight, we should have already been planning to go home at that point. We were clinging to the status quo and stubbornly awaiting its return. We relaxed, watched Netflix, and cleaned a bit. Our moods were low, and the crushing uncertainty of it all seemed to fill the house. We decided to grab dinner and a drink at a local cafe that night to escape the 4 walls that were feeling less and less like a home. It was nice to be out and about. We found a table in the corner and got our first round with some guacamole. As we were finishing the first glass of wine, Nicole got a text from one of her colleagues. The Prime Minister had just announced that all non-essential businesses would be closing at midnight that night until further notice. I felt a knot of fear form in my stomach. We talked frantically about what that meant and what we would do, anxious about what the next measure taken would be. Our panic was interrupted by the live band starting their set with an energetic and macabre line that is still echoing in my ears. Bienvenue à la fin du monde. Welcome to the end of the world. The energy in the room shifted as the band played all the best French hits and even some great English ones like Bohemian Rhapsody. We sang along and laughed. The bartender started offering free shots and danced with the rest of us. Reflecting now, I can see the logical progression of all these steps. I know that the smart move in this situation would have been to leave, to go home and self-isolate. Gatherings like that at the bar were exactly what the government was trying to discourage by closing non-essential businesses. In the moment, however, the gravity of the situation was just starting to set in. Just days after everything felt normal, we were facing a crisis. But in that bar, and in that night, we weren't facing it alone. Everyone there was scared, but at least we were together. Sunday the 15th was the first day of feeling more or less trapped in the house. With still no plans to leave, we attempted to give ourselves a bit of structure in the day. We started it off with Zumba. We cleaned more. We all went on a boring trip to the grocery store for our weekly stocks. We tried our best to stay busy and avoid panic, a task much easier said than done. Marie and I took a casual walk by the canal after I got a message from my advisor telling me she thought it might be best for me to head home. The long walk and fresh air helped a bit to loosen that heavy knot in my stomach. On Monday, my roommates and I talked and decided that we should limit our trips outside the house. We decided to run to the grocery store again to pick up some food that would endure longer than our normal haul of bread and cheese. The once boring supermarket felt like a foreign landscape. People flooded the aisles, most shelves were stocked, but some sections were beginning to clear out. Employees were bustling around to keep up with the rush. We waited 20 minutes in line for the checkout and returned home with our haul and waited for President Macron's next speech at 8 p.m. that night. Once again huddled on the couch, my roommates and I awaited the next development from the president. In his speech, Macron announced the country would commence full lockdown the next day at 12 p.m. No one would be permitted to leave their homes without a form verifying that they were out for one of the following 5 reasons. 1. Outings between home and place of work, when they are indispensable for the exercise of activities that cannot be organized in the form of teleworking or traveling professionals who cannot be deferred. 2. Outings to make essential purchases in authorized establishments. 3. Health-related outings. 4. Outings for compelling family reasons or for assistance to vulnerable individuals or childcare. And 5. Short outings near home related to individual physical activity, excluding any collective sport practice and to address the needs of pets. There would be no more walks by the canal and no more visiting friends around town. That knot in my stomach tightened once again. My life there was getting smaller and smaller, and it left me feeling cornered in a way that I never would have imagined just a week before. That was the moment that I decided it was time to leave the country. If this developing crisis would continue to escalate, I needed to be with my family. We called our respective consulates the next day. The American consulate was painfully unhelpful. They told Nicole and I that the situation was developing and to get home now, while there were still flights out, or stay until further notice. When we questioned how late was too late, or what resources or support the U.S. government had for expats at this troubling time, his answer, regardless of the question, was the same: get home now, or stay indefinitely. We bought our tickets that evening. The rest of the week passed in a stressful blur. By Wednesday morning, my roommates and I all had tickets for Sunday the 22nd. The next obstacle was to find how to get to the airport. What is normally a relatively simple problem took us 2 full days to solve. The best plan seemed to be to reserve a hotel at the airport for Saturday night so that we wouldn't miss our flights if there were delays in the transportation to the airport. Normally, we would turn to trains or rideshare programs. There were no trajectories available to get to the airport through the normal rideshare companies. Only 10% of trains were running, and they were only accepting a fraction of their normal capacity. The trajectory to the airport on the trains was normally about an hour. All of the options now were 3.5 hours, and every single train was canceled or full. With the knot in my stomach tightening every moment, we spent all day, Wednesday and Thursday, calling everyone we could possibly think of to help. Professors, school administration, program coordinators, the coronavirus hotline, and the school district. No one could give us a ride to the airport because of the lockdown. Anyone that tried ran the risk of up to 2 €130 fines. It felt like everyone knew that it was best for us to get home, but there was no way for us to get there, and no one had any answers. I wasn't able to sleep more than 3 to 4 hours a night. I completely lost my appetite. My roommates were experiencing similar problems. We reminded each other to eat even when we weren't hungry. It seemed like we were taking turns freaking out and crying. With every fruitless response, the stress in our house grew. Finally, after calling every taxi in town, on Thursday night we found a single company that was still running and could take us to the airport for €300. We confirmed twice, both with the company and the coronavirus information hotline, that this option would work. On Friday, as we were closing our accounts, packing bags, and cleaning our house, Maria got word that her flight was canceled. Later that evening, I got the same news. After panic searching, I was lucky enough to find a flight out the next evening with Air France. Unfortunately, Maria was unable to find an option to get her home to the Canary Islands. On Saturday morning, Nicole and I took the cab to the airport. It all went smoothly. I could feel my protective mask dampening with tears as we drove through the empty streets of Cambrai. I had just said goodbye to Maria, someone who had become one of my closest friends. The thought of her alone in the house for the foreseeable future made my heart ache with disappointment and guilt. The once bustling square was essentially empty. 1 or 2 lonely cars sat in the parking lot. There was a single person at the bakery, which, still considered an essential business, had pushed their serving counters to the entrance and were only serving to-go clients. I tried to soak in every inch of the landscape as we drove south towards the Charles de Gaulle airport, still anxious and grappling with disbelief of what was happening. At 6:30 that Saturday evening, I left France. I had to fly to LAX because Denver was not one of the 11 airports in the US still accepting flights from Europe. After the 12-hour flight, I arrived in LA at around 10 p.m. local time. My connection to Denver left at 1 a.m. that night. I landed at Denver International Airport at 4 a.m. on Sunday the 22nd, around 25 hours after I left my house in Cambrai. I went straight from the airport down to Walsenburg and into quarantine and have been following strict quarantine procedures since. As I write this, Maria is still in France, where the lockdown has just been extended 15 days. If people are out without a valid reason or proper documentation, they face a fine of 135 to 375 euros, 1,500 euros for the second violation, and 3,750 euros and imprisonment on the third. There is 1 flight a day from France to the US that alternates daily between LAX, JFK, and New York. That flight is now the only option for Americans trying to leave France. While everything about my departure from France felt sudden and distressing, I hold no resentment for the actions of the French government. A virus does not concern itself with the discomfort of the people. Despite all the stress and panic I felt from lockdown, I am immensely disappointed that I'm not seeing our government take those same steps. This virus is not a hoax, and is surely not a scheme to aid a particular party in the 2020 American election. This is a global phenomenon, and at the end of the day, these restrictions are about saving people's lives. Your parents, your grandparents, your loved ones who have asthma or who are immunocompromised, maybe even you, are vulnerable. That is who we are doing this for. A government that is putting anything ahead of protecting those lives scares me more than lockdown ever did.
So when you say that the fines for going out without one of those certificates reach up to 3,500 euros for the third trip.
3,700.
3,700. Is that all across France?
Yes, that's a as far as I know, that's a national measure that's been taken.
That's something that I think is really powerful in a way, because it really goes to show the sort of intense lockdown that entire countries around the world are under. You know, here, Colorado is also at a shelter-in-place, level, but we don't have anything of that nature. We went out yesterday to get groceries, and we didn't have to sign anything, and there was a ton of people milling about, just walking around town, just trying to live life normally. That would get you slapped into prison if you did that in France.
On your third offense, I think it's your third offense within 30 days, I think the measure is less, so it's not about making money for the state or anything like that in this situation. It's because they had similar problems. No one wants to let go of the status quo, and this all is happening really suddenly, and that's really scary for people. And so, like I said, it's easier to kind of cling to normalcy, and I think the government has enacted stricter measures because people were, rolling those dice. For 135 euros was initially the set fine for being out without documentation, and then they increased the first offense can be between 135 and 375 euro, and then the second one it jumps up to 1,500, and then the third one you're facing imprisonment. So
those are some pretty steep climbs.
Yeah. And another thing that they had problems with at the very beginning, one of the reasons that you were allowed to leave your house was for short outings near to home related to individual physical activity. So going on jogs and things like that to be physical, not just sit in your house and become unhealthy. And what they were seeing was people were going out to large parks in some cities, like Lille. I watched a news piece that took place in Lille, where people were all going to the Citadel, which is this big, beautiful park in Lille, France, and they were going there to do their jogging like they did all the time. But they started being really strict about near to home. So if you didn't live within a kilometer of that park, they were giving you a citation for being out, or giving you a fine for being out. And on top of that, I think that they ended up closing the park because it was becoming such a problem. So a lot of this has been the government putting these lockdown procedures in place and then trying to figure out how to get people to actually follow them, because not everyone was taking it seriously, and not necessarily because they're bad people or because they don't want to protect lives, but just because it is drastic. It's a huge, huge change to make to your life. So people were trying to find ways to preserve some of their normal life and all of it.
Yeah, and now that the weather's getting beautiful, every bone in your body just aches to go outside and experience, springtime, and it just feels like the right thing to do on one very instinctual level, to go out and see people and to be involved with nature.
Right.
And I think a big part of the problem that people are also having is that there is no real set end date. How long can you keep those orders under place, before people start going wild?
Right.
I mean, if it was, okay, everybody stay inside for 2 weeks and then we'll go back on business as normal, I feel like people would have a better chance of doing that. But it's all so open-ended right now, and the weird dynamic is that it'll end quicker if we all go inside, now. Right?
Not necessarily. Essentially what's happening is we're playing a statistics game right now. There's a normal curve, and it's very steep. It goes up very quickly, and then it will come back down, just like any disease, any virus that sweeps through. The problem is that this particular virus spikes up very quickly and will surpass by thousands and thousands and thousands of people the limitations of the hospital systems in almost all countries, including the United States. So what we're trying to do, which feels it feels like it should end sooner if we do the right thing, but in reality, we're trying to take that regular curve that's symmetrical, and we're just trying to push that peak down so that at the peak of the infection, we're still within the limitations of the hospital system. So in reality, it will last longer if we do that, because we want to slowly let the number of cases slowly increase and then start to decline over a longer period of time, so that it doesn't just happen in a week and we lose thousands of lives, because that's what will happen if this hospitals. I mean, I read something about hospitals in Italy. There are doctors there who are essentially using war hospital logic. So two people come in and they only have so many resources. They decide when they walk in who gets to live, because the fact of the matter is, immunocompromised woman of 47 who has two kids and an 80-year-old grandparent, they're both going to need essentially life support to get through this alive. And they don't have the capacity to give every single person coming in life support. So that's why so many lives are being lost. It's not that we can't keep them alive, it's that there's just not the space. So we're not seeing huge numbers of deaths in the United States right now, but we're only on our way up that first side of the curve. You know, we're not near the peak right now. And what we want to do is we want to delay that peak as long as we can.
So even if everyone was to go inside for 2 weeks, would the virus just die off?
I don't know anything about that. I know that all I know is the statistic thing, and that's something that I really appreciated about the way France handled the problem as well, is there was constant discussion of that. We're buying time. That was something that Macron said a number of times. We're buying time, and so it's not about killing the virus. The virus needs to run its course. You know, it's really hard to just keep everyone inside, because, you know, even at grocery stores and things like that, there's a chance of infection. But if we're limiting social interactions to the extreme as much as possible, the virus is still going to keep running through, but it's just not going to spike up in the way it did in Wuhan, in Italy, or even in France. France was following, until these strict procedures were in place, France was following the same trajectory as Italy. And now that they are, I'm speaking from something Maria told me, but she's been reading the news in France, and what they're seeing is the curve is starting to flatten a little bit. So they're starting to see less of that just essentially vertical trajectory of the infections every day. Because what we were seeing in Italy and Wuhan and that stuff is the number of people with the virus was doubling every day. That is that's too quick. Too many people are going to get it, and with the percentage of people who are at risk from this, that's going to mean a lot of people are going to lose their lives.
Well, I think the similar thing is happening in Italy, where they're finally starting to see the curve flatten a little bit, but it has been particularly brutal over there, maybe because they've got a really old population and a lot of people over there smoke. And now United States, has the most cases of any other country in the world.
We're a huge country too. We've got lots of people to infect.
I wish that there were some easy answers in this whole thing.
Yeah, I think that the way that France approached it, that I appreciated about it, is one crisis at a time. A lot of people are afraid about the economy right now.
Sure.
It's valid.
Yeah, I'm afraid about the economy right now.
Right. At the end of the day, my loved ones, the people in my community that are at risk from this, are more important to me than the economy. I don't want anyone to be sacrificing their life for it. And that's one crisis at a time. So again, another theme that I saw in all of Macron's speeches is recognition that this is going to cause problems. And something that I also appreciated was, in France, it has become essentially optional to pay rent at this point in time, because so many people are out of work. If it's not legal to evict people. You can't be kicked out of your apartment at this time in France. On top of that, they're already talking about, essentially protections to people's jobs, protections to small businesses. I mean, this has been a conversation throughout the whole thing. They haven't dumped a ton of money into large corporations, because that's not going to help the people of the country. So what they're doing right now in the French government, from what I understand, is that they are amassing as much money as they can to pour into this economic problem after this crisis is faced, because right now there's very little that can be done in the face of a developing economic problem when we really need people to be staying at home. We need people to not be working, you know?
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. I think that it's very, very scary, but that's just the way that it is. And, I think that a lot of people's hopes in trying to fix the economy right now or set up something so that the economy won't collapse are kind of futile and maybe not really looking the situation in its face. The fact of the matter is we are going to be dealing with some severe economic downfall, and I would just rather that we have all of our community there, or the vast majority of our community there, to help pick up the pieces, when it's done.
Right. The economy is important, and I will not deny that, but at the end of the day, what is the point of a society that it doesn't care about its citizens enough to take the steps that it needs to keep them alive? Because at the end of the day, that's what society is for, right? For protecting and for working together as on these, this social contract to protect everyone to the greatest extent that we can, to give everyone the right to life, freedom, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Mm-hmm. And that's in our core values. And if we're choosing the economy above life for thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of Americans, of people, then that's not what we signed up for. That's not in our social contract. So that's my view on it.
Well, thinking about social contract makes me think about our own, micro community here in Werfeno County, Los Animas, Colfax. Here there's a pretty high rate of poverty already, and a lot of business owners who have done very, very well for years and years are suddenly facing, the opportunity or the possibility of their businesses closing indefinitely. And I know that is a huge concern for people all across the world right now, and I hope that there will be some radical changes and policies implemented to help address that situation. But I do wonder about what we can do as individuals to support our community in whatever way we can. And so I think that one of the most important things is to consider, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You need to address nutrition and, these very, very basic core homeostasis aspects of well-being in order to build up anything that resembles a civilization. And so I think that I would just encourage everyone who can to try to support the people in the community, look into local charities and food drives. And if you still have restaurants that are operating for to go or for takeout, I think that there's a lot to be said for taking all the necessary precautions and then trying to order to get some food from those around you, and try to get food to those around you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think after all of this blows over, especially in small communities like this, I really hope to see a surge of kind of that shop local movement. I hope that there's ways for these businesses to come back through the support of the community. Those who can shop at the local stores, local markets, buy your clothes from the local businesses, those kinds of things, as opposed to buying them from large corporations like Walmart and things like that, because what that does is that draws the money back, even more money out of the region in an economic depression. So, I hope to see a surge of local support, especially in this area after all of this blows over, because that's in the end, keeping that money in the community just keeps feeding it back into, you shop at someone else's business, they shop at yours, it all builds on itself, and it keeps the money here as opposed to sending it off to wherever Walmart headquarters is, or those kind of things. But that can be difficult too, because those large corporations have prices that are set because of how big they are. So it's not possible for everyone, but for those who can, I think that will be a really important step to be taking if you have the resources to be supporting your local community as much as possible. Mm-hmm. Avoiding just getting the simple little things that cost $2 no matter where you buy them. Buy them at the store here in Walsenburg or in this county, as opposed to ordering them on Amazon.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been covering the La Vida school board for a while now, and I've been really, really impressed with the various ways that they've handled this and the way that they're really, really scrabbling to try to address some issues of food insecurity and continued education throughout this crisis. And they said something that I thought was particularly interesting at this last meeting, which they held over Zoom, the online meeting host. They were talking about the building of the new school building. They're going to break ground and try to construct it because in the past, when we've faced difficult economic recessions, it's been those public works which have been so important for revitalizing the community, and it's the kind of thing that will bring employment. It'll bring labor, and with labor comes hungry stomachs back into the community. It could provide jobs, and certainly it'll give people something to take their minds off of the difficulties. So I'd really like to see more of that. If we can maybe stop sending so much money to Wall Street and bring in some sort of great new deal to really invest in public works around the whole country, then I think that would be really terrific. But otherwise, just try to keep that in mind for all you listeners out there. Particularly if you have any means to help out. Invest in your community, especially once things are looking a little bit more safe. But in whatever ways you can now, please do so as well. Stay strong out there, Southwesterners.
And something you might have seen on Facebook already, but I think bears repeating. For parents out there, there's no way to do this right. Do your best. Try to follow all of the guidelines you've been given, but understand that just because you or your kids aren't their most productive at this point in time, we are in a crisis, and that's completely normal. So don't be too hard on yourselves and do your best.
Amen. Thanks for listening. If you want to read Josie's essay for yourself, you can find it at worldjournalnewspaper.com by searching for A Worldwide Pandemic with Local Effects. We here at the World Journal want to encourage all of you to keep your heads up and faces covered, and keep your heart as open as your arms are shut. We will get through this tough time, and you can do your part in flattening the curve by staying away from other people as much as possible, by washing your hands diligently, and by spreading good news and good advice. Knock it off with the barbecues. Tune into the World Journal for coverage on all things Rocky Mountain Southwest. And folks, keep on keeping on.